On the Mayflower wrote accounts of that famous voyage of 1620, and I'm told the Alpena County Library has an excellent Discovery Channel documentary about it if you want to see the details. It was a harrowing and dangerous voyage. First of all, they left England much later than the ship's master, Christopher Jones, had hoped to leave. There were disagreements with the people who had loaned the passengers the money to hire the two ships. And then taking the passengers from the badly leaking speedwell made for crowded conditions. There were 102 passengers plus 30 sailors on the Mayflower. Because they were late leaving, they encountered autumn storms on the Atlantic Ocean that were particularly severe. The voyage took, as Tom said, 65 days. That's more than 2 months at sea. The storms also blew them significantly off course, northwards. By the time the ship came into Plymouth Harbor at Cape Cod, it was winter, November 9th, 1620. Martin Marty writes, though they lacked any documentation authorizing them to stay there, they settled anyhow, choosing to leave behind the vast and furious ocean for the firm and stable earth. Their land of promise was, and I quote, a hideous and desolate wilderness. So they huddled offshore on board the Mayflower for that winter. Before they settled, they agreed upon a Mayflower Compact, which spells out the terms of a covenanted society, the first document so written in America. The crew and the passengers had not had fresh food in several weeks. The cold and the damp, along with their poor nutrition, caused many people to get sick. By spring, when the Mayflower finally left to return to England on April 5th of 1621, nearly half of the passengers and half of the crew had died. They were buried in unmarked graves for fear that the native Indians might notice the weakness of these newcomers. They found native villages nearby, but the huts were deserted. There was an eerie silence in the surrounding woods, writes Martin Marty. It was not until March that a stray Indian named Samoset, who had learned some English from occasional fishermen, told them about 4 years earlier a disease had almost wiped out his people entirely. He also introduced the last Pawtuxet survivor, an Indian named Squanto, who had been snatched off to England as a youth, where he had learned the language well enough to serve now as a middleman, negotiator with the few Indians in the area. The intervention of Samoset and Squanto, along with their Indian corn and their teaching hunting and gathering skills, literally saved many of the settlers' lives. I appreciate Jenny Titus offering all the artwork that is in our gallery. When you head out toward the elevator, enjoy some of that Native American original artwork and photographs, reminding us that the season of Thanksgiving is a mutual season to remember. The Pilgrims had come to America intending to pursue their faith free from the constraints of organized Anglican religion. That was their reason for coming. And they assumed they could live on fishing and farming in the New World. However, they were not good at it. Mark Kurlansky wrote a book about cod, not God, cod, the fish. The fish we will have for supper tonight at our Reader's Theater in Fellowship Hall. I chose codfish for tonight's menu because it would have been a huge part of the Pilgrims' first Thanksgiving feast. However, the fish could have saved some of them during that first winter aboard the Mayflower, if our pious Pilgrim ancestors had been a bit more broad-minded about what they ate. They were parked in what we call Cape Cod because codfish were absolutely everywhere, and yet the Pilgrims were starving. The fact that they arrived at the onset of winter is a first hint of how little they knew about survival. Still, they had come to New England for fishing as well as farming, so why were the Pilgrims starving in the richest fishing grounds ever recorded? Well, according to Kurlansky, it seems they had not thought to bring much fishing tackle. Not that these university-trained townsfolk would have known how to use it, even if they brought it. 4 or 5 English ships had been fishing in New England since 1616. The year after the Pilgrims' landing in 1621, while the Pilgrims were nearly starving to death, 10 British ships were profitably fishing cod in New England waters, bringing their catch back to feed the Europeans. The following year, 37 ships were sent from England to fish. By 1624, 50 British ships were fishing off the coast of New England. But they took their catch back to England. That's what the market was for. They did not bring it to the land. They did not offer it to the separatists, the Pilgrims. Part of the Pilgrims' problem was that being English, they did not want to eat unfamiliar food. Everything they found in America was foreign to them. And Alpena still doesn't eat a lot of foreign food. The natives, oh, by the way, that was not in the book. The natives, Samoset and Squanto, showed them not only how to grow corn, like the packet that you have with you, but how to harpoon sturgeon, how to catch eels, how to pry open the clams and the mussels that they found along the shore. But the Pilgrims wouldn't do it. Shellfish were forbidden foods in the Bible. They wouldn't eat such things. The waters were so rich with lobster that they were literally crawling out of the sea and piling up on the beaches. But the Pilgrims, and actually most people until quite recently, did not want to eat these huge, clacking, speckled sea monsters. Not only couldn't they fish, the Pilgrims didn't know how to hunt. Some grazing herds of deer provided venison, much like they are doing this weekend for our Michigan hunters. Go look at the buckpole there on Chisholm. And those big, slow-moving turkey birds, they were an easy target. That's where we get the phrase a turkey shoot, meaning something very simple to do. They're right there. Accustomed to organized village life in England and in Holland, where there were markets for goods and markets for fish and markets for meat, most of the Pilgrims were bad at farming. They're good at the free market economy, but there wasn't one. In fact, they never had a good harvest until they learned to fish cod and plow the waste into the ground as fertilizer. Their greatest food gathering skill in those early years was finding the catches of Indian corn and food that had been hidden away by the native tribesmen. Samoset and Squanto provided the corn that kept the Pilgrims alive during their first winter. That's why you were given those little packets of 5 kernels of corn when you arrived this morning. Imagine, that's all you had to eat for an entire day. Now, before we feast and give thanks for our abundance, pause to reflect on the hardships of those early immigrants to America. With the help of Samoset and Squanto, the Pilgrims agreed to a treaty with Chief Massasoit that lasted for half a century. It was the occasion of these friendly relations between the Native Americans and the immigrant Pilgrims that's remembered as the first Thanksgiving in North American history. Altogether, 90 natives responded to the Pilgrims' invitation to a harvest feast. They had no idea there were that many of them still living in those New England woods. And come back at 5 o'clock to hear the rest of the story as we enjoy our codfish dinner. But I suggest that when we see news articles about the hopes and the hardships of today's immigrants making their way to America, let's recall what it must have been like for our own early English immigrants coming to America. The first Americans, like Samoset, Squanto, and Chief Massasoit, helped the Pilgrims to survive as they settled. Their covenant of peace, friendship, lasted well into the Puritan era which followed, which is the second part of tonight's drama, and so please come and discover that story as well. Every year, as I said a moment ago, more and more pilgrims arrived in the Plymouth plantation, but no minister was among them. This was a sign, writes Martin Marty, that these radical Protestants could do without priests. They simply followed St. Paul's advice. Rejoice in the Lord, always. Let all men know your forbearance. The Lord is at hand. Have no anxiety about anything, but in everything, with prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will keep your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Amen.